Hey guys, welcome back. So with us jumping back into the Carnage series, we've reached the point where Cletus Kasady makes his return. So for this one, we're going to talk about where he's been since Extreme Carnage, what he's been doing, and the reasons why him and the Carnage Symbiote haven't been seeing eye to eye. But before we jump in, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week. And don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so jumping back in right off of the heels of our talk on Carnage going to Hell to get Venom. After Carnage removed the Venom Codex from Malekith, Hela just threw Malekith's broken body over her shoulder and put him back where Detective Shade found him. Then she goes on to remove John Shade from Hell with telling him that it's not his time to come here, at least not yet. And then next, we see Carnage explain to Kenneth Neely what he had taken from Malekith, showing him the Venom Codex and telling him how it's what a symbiote leaves behind after bonding with the host, and how it's like a unique signature or a memory of their symbiosis that the host carries even after they're separated. And Carnage goes on to tell Neely that it's similar the other way around, because the Codex works very much like how a symbiote continues to carry the inner workings of their host. And with hearing this, this causes Neely to then say it's like they're haunted by each other, which is an interesting way to put it, because we get an example of this as they head to their next location, while we instead go back to Midgard at St. Est's orphanage, which is a location that means a lot to Cletus Kasady. And this is something that we were shown back in Amazing Spider-Man Volume 1 in a story called Savage Genesis, when Peter was at the Bugle, retracing some of Venom's activities, with Peter believing at the time that a series of murders were committed by Venom. But while doing a bit of investigating at the Daily Bugle, Peter stumbled across a bunch of archived articles on Cletus Kasady, saying how Kasady was sentenced for 11 life sentences prior to his escape, but also these archived articles revealed new information to Peter about Kasady's past, like the fact that Kasady was raised at St. Est's Home for Boys in Brooklyn, and how there was this huge fire years back where one of the disciplinarian administrators' bodies were found in the rubble with their skull smashed. And though the police theorized that she fell and smashed her skull in a panic, Peter believed at the time that it was possible that it was actually Kasady's first kill. So after this, Peter made his rounds asking anyone who may have known Kasady to share whatever information they could, and from what Peter was hearing at the time, he was like, man, I'm starting to miss Venom. But with Peter eventually making his way to the St. Est abandoned orphanage, he had learned at this point from what he had heard that this was the only place that Kasady ever called home. And as Peter made his way inside to investigate and see what he can find, Kasady was inside in his birthday suit having a campfire with his old bear Binky. But I bring this up mainly to point out what this place meant to Cletus Kasady. It's the only place he called home, he called it his sanctuary, and it's the first place that he fought Spider-Man. But again, I bring this up because the significance of this location, it plays a huge role in the current agenda of Cletus Kasady. Because now when we fast forward to your modern day, at St. Est's orphanage, we find a kid by the name of Scott Rawson, who's doing this stream called Not So Spooky, where his plan is to do a live stream with him going inside the orphanage that there's been so many rumors and spooky stories about. But as soon as he walks in, the first room that he sees, it's squeaky clean, which makes absolutely no sense for a building that's been abandoned for decades. But as he's talking to his stream and telling his audience how the place looks so cliche, the comments begin to tell him that there's writing appearing on the wall behind him. So he turns around and he sees that it reads, "Time to put some skin in the game." And on the ground just in front of him, he finds that there's a scalpel that's been left there for him. So he picks it up, saying that he guesses this is where most scrubs would make their exit. And I gotta say that he's right, cause I would have been gone. I'd have been that scrub in a heartbeat. But he picks up the scalpel and cuts out a piece of skin from the palm of his hand, and as soon as he does, a door opens, leading deeper into the abandoned orphanage. So Scott walks through the door, and as he makes his way further in, he sees this eerie looking guy eating something off a plate while wearing a robe that looks very familiar to Scott, because his father had that same robe. But at this point, his stream is going crazy, and everyone's asking him to look at the plate. They want to see what the dude's eating. So Scott pans down only to see that this dude is having a full serving of FaceTime. Then suddenly, writing appears on this wall as well, saying, "Feed the man some face to eat, Scott Rawson." And for a moment, there's kind of this suspense where it has you thinking, is he gonna do it? Is he not? And then he just comes staggering out of the room with pieces of his face missing. because he absolutely did do it. But as he stumbles into the next room, he hears a voice say, "Ah yes, let's turn that off, shall we?" As his phone begins to completely glitch out and lose signal, only for us to then find that that voice was the voice of Cletus Kasady. And with seeing this, I want to take a brief moment and talk about why he's here as well as what he's doing here. Because starting with the conclusion of Extreme Carnage, which is the last time that we saw Cletus Kasady, with it just being his consciousness in the Carnage Symbiote, going for a ride as he would say. But during this time at the conclusion of Extreme Carnage, when he went up against Flash and Tony Stark, who brought in his Symbiote, which is the suit that Tony made during King in Black, when he took one of Knull's dragons and used Extremis to separate it from the Hive and combine it with his tech in this armor. But at this time, and also I got the link for the full video in the description, in case you may have missed our talks on Extreme Carnage, I got you covered. But at the conclusion of the story, while the consciousness of Cletus was in the Carnage Symbiote, he took the Symbiote dragon from Tony and flew away while saying, "The whole world has seen what our Hive did here, and they're gonna eat each other out of fear. The next time you see us, it's gonna be a different world." But it was after this event when Cletus Kasady and the Carnage Symbiote had their falling out, because next the Carnage Symbiote wanted to go on and execute the plans of Cletus Kasady so the two of them could become more. But for Cletus, with him now having the Symbiote dragon with Extremis in the mix, they were already more powerful, so he wanted to settle there. And after rejecting the Carnage Symbiote, Cletus has just been at the orphanage with his Symbiote since his physical body had been destroyed long before. So with how this played out, Carnage went on to acquire godhood, while Cletus Kasady has just stayed at the orphanage. And for Kasady, he's fine with this, because to him, Carnage gets to be a god out there, and he gets to be a god in here. But before I get too far ahead of myself, I just wanted to paint the picture of why Cletus Kasady's here, why it's this specific location, what he's doing here, as opposed to what the Carnage Symbiote has been doing, which is what we've been following this whole series. But for Kasady, with him seeing Scott make it this far, and actually feeding his face to get here, he's a bit surprised because he thought Scott was gonna leave, much like the others who came here before him. So he asked Scott, like, it was the robe, wasn't it? You want to know how the guy was wearing your father's robe? Because Kasady figures it was that curiosity that compelled Scott to take it a step further when most others would just leave. And with Scott going on to ask, what is this place? Who are you? Kasady just tells him that he's an orphan boy who grew up in this house. He's seen beyond these worlds, but even still, he keeps coming back here to this house over and over. And he's often wondered if this house was actually his first symbiosis. But to take it a step further and explain himself a bit more, Kasady tells Scott when he returned, reborn, in his new skin, in new armor, he melded with this place. He is this house, and this house is him. And from there he goes on to tell Scott how he knew about his father's robe, because when Scott gave a piece of his skin to the house, Kasady used that to peer into Scott's memories. And he goes on to tell Scott how he knows how hard Scott tries to be interesting and charming, and why he sneaks into houses at night armed with a phone. And Kasady tells him that this house let him know that Scott's looking for something beyond the mundane, when actually Scott himself is the door that needs to be opened to see that. So Kasady asks him if he wants to open the door to the next room. Scott says yes, and they make their way to where deeper inside the house, now that Kasady has sampled Scott's blood more than once, this now takes them into a labyrinth of Scott's memories. Memories of his father cheating on his mother, memories of Scott being a bully, and Kasady lets him know that this house goes as deep as we go in the interior. The only limitation is how much do you have to offer. So for a moment, Scott is like, no way, this can't be real. And Kasady takes that personally. So he tells Scott, like, don't you dare to confuse what's in here, the rich sensations of inner flesh, with your mundane reality and boring truths. So he opens the door and tells Scott if he wants to leave, he can go. But he tells him no one's gonna believe his truth because everyone's too frightened to believe anything beyond themselves. And Kasady goes on to show Scott different moments of his life, different moments of his truth. And he tells him life claws away the pieces until you're too old to notice, and then you die. And with Scott asking if this is real or not, Kasady asks in return, after seeing what he saw here, which one felt more real. So right away, Scott makes his decision, and he tosses his phone outside. And when he goes back in, he asks Cletus about what he mentioned earlier when he said that he'd been outside and far beyond, because Scott wants to know, with everything that Cletus saw, was there nothing out there in all existence that could keep him? And Cletus lets him know that he'd found someone once. They were inseparable. They were almost a god. And he goes on to tell Scott about the Carnage Symbiote without being too specific, but instead just saying how power changes people. It changes their perspective, and that someone who Kasady was with left him to pursue that greater power. But also, Cletus goes on to say that he believes that the Carnage Symbiote is going to make his rounds across the realms, across the universe, and eventually realize that everything out there doesn't compare or isn't as nearly as beautiful or even as real as what Kasady has created inside his interior, inside of this orphanage. And Kasady believes that there's gonna come a day when the Carnage Symbiote is done, where the symbiote will see this, understand, and return to him. But yeah, it's pretty crazy how on one hand the Carnage Symbiote, he says that Kasady rejected him, and on the other hand with Kasady, he says the symbiote left him behind. But as it stands, they both have very different opinions on what godhood looks like and what that means to each of them individually. And so now real quick, I want to give a special shout out to all the patrons. Thank you guys for all of your support. And for anyone who's new here who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below where you can go to patreon.com/Dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.